In this Baldur's Gate 3 video, I'm going to be showing you 3 early game Warlock builds, but unlike the Paladin video where we did something similar, these are not going to be multi-class. They will all be separate single-classed Warlock builds, and there is a reason for that. I feel like Warlocks in general don't lend themselves as well to multi-classing as something like Paladins do in many other classes because their spell slots do not gain levels when they multi-class with other classes. So taking ranks in Warlock is the best way to make them stronger, and if you're a new player, you'd probably be better off just single-classing a Warlock until you have a better understanding of the game. Okay, so the first build I'm going to show you is a very offensive, fire-oriented Fiend build. So obviously you're going to be taking the Fiend subclass here, and the reason we're taking the Fiend is because it has access to a lot of fire spells, and we're going to be focusing on fire damage for this build. I suggest taking Burning Hands and Arms of Hadar as your 2 level 1 spells here. Then when we get to level 2, we're going to gain a second spell slot, and we're also going to gain a couple Eldritch Invocations. I recommend taking Agonizing Blast here to further boost the damage of your Eldritch Blast by your Charisma modifier when you attack with it. And I also recommend getting Fiendish Vigor in order to let you cast False Life without expending a spell slot. This will give you 7 extra HP on top of your HP every time you go into a fight, and you don't need to use a spell slot to use this. And Fiendish Vigor is very good early on in the game because 7 health is quite a lot at level 2. However, as you get further and further into the game, this becomes less useful as health pools increase more and more because this will not scale up like it would be if you had the regular version of this spell. And then when you get to level 3, I recommend picking up Scorching Ray. Scorching Ray is absolutely devastating whether you want to use it on one enemy or multiple enemies, and it works very similarly to Eldritch Blast. It targets the armor class of the enemy. It benefits from elevation. It's penalized if you're standing next to enemies when you cast it. So you want to try and use this at range when you're going to use it, and you're going to try and either melt 1 target or melt 3 targets at once. Here you're also going to choose a Pact Boon. I recommend either choosing Pact of the Blade if you want to have a melee option or a better melee option if enemies get into melee range of you, or choosing Pact of the Chain in order to gain a familiar. I really like Imp because it can turn invisible, and as it gets higher level at level 5, it'll be able to attack twice in a given turn, and this is really, really strong in my opinion. And then at level 4, we're going to pick up the Elemental Adept feat, which is going to make it so that your spells ignore resistance to a damage type of your choice. We're going to select Fire here, and it's also going to make it so when you cast spells of that type that you cannot roll a 1 for your damage roll. So if you're using something like Scorching Ray, you won't be able to get really terrible damage out of it. And this isn't super strong in the early goings of the game, but it will get stronger and stronger as you progress the game, and it's not bad to pick up now. You could go with ability score improvement now and pick up Elemental Adept later on, depending on what you do with your character. But the idea here is we're going to be picking up a lot of fire spells from the Fiend, in particular as we level higher and higher. And this way, because we're focusing on one damage type and an enemy all of a sudden has resistances to fire, we're not screwed. We're still going to be able to take out those enemies no problem. And I recommend picking up Cloud of Daggers at this level. Cloud of Daggers is just a really strong early game AoE. And it sits in an area, and if enemies walk through it, they take damage. If they start their turn in and take damage, it requires concentration, and it's the only spell that I have here that actually requires concentration, as we're intentionally focusing on not having spells that require concentration, because that way you don't have to worry about your concentration getting broken, and we're not set up to really, make concentration checks well like we will in one of our other builds. But it's a really good early AoE, and you should definitely consider using it early on at least. And then when we get to level 5, we're going to be picking up Fireball. This is a nice AoE fire spell, no concentration needed here. You just pick an area, fling it into it, and it does devastating effect. Again, because we have Elemental Adept, if anything had fire resistance, it's not going to matter. And your spell slots will also upgrade to level 3 at this point, which means that any spells you cast that can be upcast will deal more damage or have better effect. Burning Hands will deal more damage. Scorching Ray will get an extra beam. Arms of Hadar will deal more damage. Cloud of Daggers will deal more damage with cast at this level, and Blindness can target another target once you pick that up as well. Also, this level, huge level, you're going to gain an extra beam to your Eldritch Blast, which means that you're going to be able to hit 2 targets or the same target twice. And you're also going to deepen Pact at this level, which means that if you took Pact of the Chain, you're going to have an Imp that can attack twice every turn now, which is great. And if you took Pact of the Blade, you're going to gain an extra attack on your turn should you attack with weapons, which is also not a bad option. At level 6, I suggest choosing Blindness. What this is going to do is it's going to allow you to target 2 characters now, and it's going to make it so that they have disadvantage on their attack rolls and all targets have advantage against them. And that's huge because no concentration needed, so you throw it on them and then all your party can have advantage on their attack rolls, which is great, and you don't have to worry about them hitting you as much. You obviously want to throw these on difficult to kill enemies so it lasts on them for a good while. So the whole concept of this build is to continue to take fire spells as you level up because you're the Fiend subclass, and also not to use concentration that much. You can just focus on throwing your spells when you need to throw spells, using your Eldritch Blast for damage when you need to use it, And also, you know, attacking with a weapon if you want, if you're going to use Pact of the Blade, or using your Imp in combat as well if you went Pact of the Chain. So then the next build is going to be a melee-focused Warlock, one that primarily melees in combat, but can also use Eldritch Blast if needed if they cannot reach a target in melee. It doesn't really matter what subclass you choose for this build. The Fiend gives you Dark One's Blessing, which gives you some health when you kill enemies, which is not bad, particularly because they're going to be in melee range, but it's not super important which you choose. So at level 2, you're going to get to pick 2 Eldritch Invocations. Here we're going to pick Agonizing Blast to increase the damage of our Agonizing Blast by our Charisma modifier, pretty standard. And we're also going to take Devil's Sight, which is going to allow us to see in darkness. Again, not dark places, but the actual darkness spell. And then at level 3, we're going to pick Pact of the Blade. This is going to allow you to attack with your Charisma modifier, which means that you need as high a Charisma as you can get for this build in order to attack with it and also cast spells with it. Constitution is good, and maybe some Dexterity for armor class, but you won't need strength at all for this build. You also want to make sure that you select the darkness spell at this level if no one else in your party has it. Ideally, one of your other casters would have the darkness spell, so you don't have to consume one of your 2 precious spell slots on it, but if not, you'll want to select it. And then at level 4, we're going to pick Great Weapon Master for our feat, and this is going to let us do a couple things. First, it's going to let us take an extra attack with our bonus action if we critically strike or kill an enemy in melee combat. We're going to be meleeing constantly, so that's really good. And secondly, you'll gain a little toggleable under your passives that will allow you to take a -5 attack roll penalty if you're using a 2-handed weapon in exchange for +10 damage. And this is really good at killing enemies, and because when you attack enemies inside darkness, you're going to have advantage against them. This can offset some of that penalty. However, you can toggle it off if you're outside of darkness fighting normally and you don't have a great attack, chance. Your hit chance isn't very high. You can toggle it off then and toggle it back on when you do have advantage. And at level 5, our spell slots will get stronger, but you'll also deepen your Pact, and you'll gain an extra attack when using your Pact weapon. So you not only be able to attack twice when you're inside darkness now, if you kill something, you'll be able to attack a 3rd time with your bonus action, which is incredibly strong. And a couple spells that I really like besides darkness for this build are Armor of Agathis. What this is going to do is it's going to provide you temporary HP and deal damage to enemies that hit you in melee combat. And it seems like it's kind of negligible at first, but remember that this is upcast to your spell slot. So as it gets higher and higher, the temporary HP you're going to gain is more and more, and the damage that you deal to melee enemies that hit you is higher and higher. And this doesn't require concentration. It just stays on you until your long rest. So it's very, very strong, particularly as you level up. However, if you don't have someone who can cast darkness besides you, you'll end up casting darkness with 1 spell slot and Armor of Agathis with another, and that will leave you no other spells that you can use in combat. And I don't really like that. You can still do it if you want, but I think this is a much better spell if someone else is going to use darkness, freeing up that last spell slot for something for you. And what I like to keep that for is usually something like Arms of Hadar, which is an AoE all around you, in case you get surrounded by a lot of enemies, either in your darkness or outside of your darkness. And this upcast as well, so it's going to deal more damage with level 3 spell slots than it will at level 2 spell slots, and it's going to continue to increase in damage as your spell slots gain level. Keep in mind, though, that you do need to maintain concentration on darkness to keep it up, and that means if you stray too far out of your darkness, you're probably going to lose your concentration, because we're not set up to maintain concentration really well. We're banking on that enemies are going to have disadvantage on their attacks. They're going to miss you a lot when they're in there, so you're not going to get hit much. Projectiles cannot come into the darkness, so ranged characters cannot attack you inside the darkness. So if you're using darkness, you're going to sit inside there. Otherwise, you're going to be using Eldritch Blast and melee attacks outside of darkness, and you don't need to cast that unless you absolutely need to. Okay, and then our 3rd and final Warlock build is more of a control Warlock, and we're going to focus on controlling the battlefield with our Warlock while dealing damage with Eldritch Blast. And I like taking either the Great Old One or the Archfey for subclasses here because they have a lot of control spells that you can choose from. I personally went the Great Old One, and that's because I can pick up slow with it. You can also gain Avard's Black Tentacles later on, which is great, as Dominate Beast and Dominate Person, and also Telekinesis. For those that were a fan of Telekinesis in like Divinity Original Sin 2, you will get this spell at level 5 spells for the Warlock, so that's really nice. So at level 2 for our Eldritch Invocations, we're going to pick up Agonizing Blast to increase the damage of Eldritch Blast and Fiendish Vigor in order to be able to cast False Life without consuming a spell slot, giving us more health. And then at level 3, I really like Cloud of Daggers because it deals a good damage early on, but it's also area denial, right? Like you throw it in an area and then enemies either have to run around it and they can't go through it, or if they do go through it, they get punished severely for it. So it does have an element of control besides the damage. And you're also going to gain a Pact boon here, and I suggest going with Pact of the Tome. This is going to give you a few cantrips, but more importantly, when you get to level 5, it's going to give you some more spells that you can cast that don't use your spell slots. So then when you get to level 4 and you get to choose a feat, you're going to either select Warcaster to give you advantage on concentration checks, or you're going to take Resilience Constitution to give you your proficiency bonus to Constitution saving throws, which includes concentration checks. So this is really important for this build because we use a lot of spells that require concentration to maintain, and you don't want to get hit and have these end early and waste a spell. So one of these two is kind of mandatory. And then at level 5 for your Eldritch Invocation, I would take Repelling Blast to be able to knock things backward with Eldritch Blast. You're also going to deepen your pact here, allowing you to use Call Lightning, Animate Dead, and Haste once each in between long rests, and these don't consume spell slots, so that's going to give you a lot more spell casting capability on your Warlock if you want to play a pure caster Warlock or one that focuses more on spell casting, and these are really great. And with your spell here, I strongly suggest taking Hunger of Hadar. What this does is it's going to put like a blackness in a large AoE on the map. That's going to become difficult terrain, so it's going to be hard for enemies to pass through, and they're also going to be blind when they're inside it, kind of preventing them from doing much at all. But what's really great about this compared to Darkness is that enemies that start their turn in it will take cold damage, and if they end their turn in it, they'll take acid damage. So it's very hard for them to get through. They're going to take damage when they're inside it, and it really allows you area denial and control over a large portion of the map, far more than Darkness allows you because of the damage that this deals. So you don't need to go into it in melee, like the melee Warlock build, but instead you just throw this somewhere and then enemies are kind of screwed. They either have to go around it or they're going to be effed. Other good spells to pick up for this build are like Hypnotic Pattern, which allow you to hypnotize enemies and they'll forgo their turn if they fail their save. You also can gain Slow, which slow down enemies, preventing them from moving much. It reduces the amount of things they can do on each turn. It can even delay spells. That's also really good. You can pick up to 6 enemies to do that. But keep in mind, to get all these spells, you'll have to replace as you go some of the early spells that you picked up in order to swap them out for these as you're leveling up. And this is a really, really fun Warlock build in my opinion. It's probably my favorite of the 3 that I mentioned because you really contribute to the battlefield in a unique way with some of these spells. And Hunger of Hadar is just a really fun and strong spell. If you're playing a Warlock, it should definitely be in your repertoire, but you're really set up with this build to maintain concentration so you can use it more effectively than maybe some other Warlock builds. So that wraps up our video on 3 early game Warlock builds. I hope this helped you get a better understanding between this and the Warlock class guide on how you can play a Warlock in the early goings of the game. We will have more advanced builds like that go up to level 12 later on, and those will be individual builds that won't be grouped together. But I wanted to get some builds out to you guys because I know you guys have been itching for them. Again, if you have more tips for other players, leave them in the comments below so that they can learn more as well. And also, if you have further questions, let me know.